Welcome back to the deep dive, where we really get into the weeds of complex ideas. Have you ever stopped and thought about what really holds society together? I mean, beyond the obvious stuff like laws or economics,
Mhm.
what's the actual glue, the thing that makes it possible to, say, shake hands on a deal, or even just trust that global trade will, work, often without us even thinking about it?
It's often invisible infrastructure.
Exactly. And today we're going on this really fascinating conceptual journey. We're diving deep into a framework called the River of Reality model. You can sort of picture it as this multi-layered map of how things work.
Yeah, building up from physics at level 1, biology at level 2.
Right. And today we're zooming in on level 3. This is where things get really interesting from a human perspective, where shared meaning starts to form actual social order.
It's labeled religion values the flow of hierarchy.
Precisely. And our mission today is to unpack that. We want to explore how shared ethical systems, and when we say religion, we're using it in a really broad, functional sense, like a comprehensive worldview.
Not just about deities or specific faiths necessarily.
Exactly. How these systems aren't just about belief, but actually function as a systematic study of value. We're going to
Yeah.
trace how that study leads to making judgments.
Defining what's good, what's bad, what's important.
hmm And how that creates what the model calls a flow of hierarchy. Basically, a shared understanding of what matters most in a society. And here's the kicker. This hierarchy, this flow, is what ultimately generates the massive social trust we need.
Trust for commerce, for governance, for everything.
Everything. For civilization itself to really hang together and thrive. And for you listening, especially if you work with complex systems, maybe in tech or business or research, getting a handle on these foundational societal operating principles is, well, it's incredibly valuable.
It really is. It's like seeing the hidden architecture.
Yeah, a shortcut to understanding what's going on beneath the surface of everyday interactions.
And what's really insightful about this model, picking up on your point, is that systemic flow. It's this kind of conceptual ascent,
Yeah.
starting from basic physics and building up to complex social organization.
Right.
And we're focusing on level 3 because it really is a critical junction point, like a major river confluence.
Okay.
It acts as the engine that translates shared meaning, which gets developed in the earlier levels into actual structured, trust-based cooperation. That's the key transformation.
So how are we going to approach this? What's the grounding?
Good question. To make sure this is a really robust analysis, especially for an audience that appreciates rigor, we're not just riffing here. We're grounding these ideas in some serious thinking.
Okay.
We'll be looking at formal philosophy, specifically a field called axiology. Then we'll bring in sociology, especially the foundational work of Emil Durkheim.
Durkheim, right. Heard of him.
Definitely. Then insights from evolutionary ethics. Peter Singer is key there. Classical philosophy, too. The Stoics have a lot to say about this.
Oh, interesting.
And the rigorous moral philosophy of Immanuel Kant. And finally, tying it all together with economics, specifically institutional economics, from Adam Smith and Douglas North.
Wow. Okay, so a real multidisciplinary dive.
Exactly. The goal is to reveal the underlying logic, the mechanisms at play, and, the really far-reaching implications of this whole flow of hierarchy idea.
Okay, let's unpack this first big piece. The model claims right at the start of level 3 that religion or ethics constitutes the study of value. Now that might throw some people off.
Yeah, it can sound a bit counterintuitive if you think of religion purely as faith or ceremonies.
Right. But you mentioned this field, axiology. How does that help us understand this claim? What exactly is axiology?
Okay, so axiology is basically the formal philosophical study of value. And that means value in the broadest possible sense: goodness, worth, what makes something desirable or important.
Okay, so not just moral value.
No, exactly. It covers moral value, aesthetic value like beauty and art, economic value, even things like the value of truth or logic.
Mm.
It's a really wide umbrella.
Yeah. Huh. I didn't realize there was a whole field for that.
Yeah, well, people have obviously been debating what's valuable forever, but the term axiology itself is actually relatively new, coined around the early 20th century.
Ah, okay.
Thinkers like Paul Lappy and Edward von Hartmann wanted to sort of unify all these different discussions about value under one conceptual roof.
Makes sense.
So what axiology gives us is the precise language and the analytical tools to look at what ethical systems and religious traditions have always been doing, even if they didn't call it that,
Oh, jizz.
which is systematically investigating, coding, ranking, and then passing on these comprehensive theories of value. What's good? What's better? What's the ultimate good?
So the very existence of axiology as a field sort of validates the model's starting point. That value can be studied systematically.
Precisely. It shows that this isn't just some fringe idea. The systematic study of value is a legitimate, established field of inquiry. These religious and ethical systems are, in effect, long-running axiological projects.
Okay, that reframes it nicely. So if these systems are studying value, how do they structure it? I think you mentioned something about intrinsic versus instrumental value. Why is that distinction so key?
Ah, yes, that's absolutely fundamental. It's like the core programming of any value system.
Yeah.
So something has intrinsic value if it's considered good in itself.
Okay, good for its own sake.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Independent of whether it's useful for getting something else, it's the ultimate goal, the non-negotiable anchor.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, in a theistic religion, it might be God, or achieving union with God, or maybe fulfilling God's will. That's the ultimate point.
Right.
In something like Buddhism, it could be nirvana, escaping the cycle of suffering. In a secular system, maybe it's human flourishing, or justice, or reason itself. These are the things valued for themselves,
The end goal.
the end goal. Now, instrumental value is different. Something has instrumental value if it's useful as a means to achieve some other good, usually that intrinsic good.
Okay, so like tools.
Exactly like tools. So things like prayer or acts of charity or following certain rules or commandments usually, these aren't seen as ends in themselves. They're valuable because they lead to salvation or enlightenment or a just society or whatever the intrinsic goal is.
I see. So one serves the other.
Precisely. And this distinction is crucial because it's what allows these systems to create that structured hierarchy of values. It defines what's most important, the ultimate destination, and then clarifies how everything else fits in, how it serves that ultimate goal.
Creates the order, the flow.
It creates the order, exactly. And religious systems in particular tend to be incredibly comprehensive in this. Axiologists talk about different realms of value, morality, art, science, politics.
Mm-hmm.
Religious frameworks often provide judgments and rankings across all of these, offering a really totalizing guide for how to live and see the world. And the deep insight here really is that every single lasting social system, whether it calls itself religious or secular, fundamentally anchors itself to a few core intrinsic values. Everything else is organized instrumentally around achieving those. Getting that distinction is step one to understanding any society's deep motivations.
Okay, so it's not just a random list of good things, it's a prioritized structure. That makes a lot of sense. But, okay, here's the million-dollar question maybe. Are these values real, like objectively out there, or are they just things we humans invent?
Ah, yes, the classic subjective versus objective debate in value theory. It's a huge one in axiology, and it has massive implications for how these systems actually work in society.
Right. So what are the two sides?
Well, you've got the value objectivists, thinkers like G.E. Moore, Nikolai Hartman. They argue that things are desired because they possess value inherently. The value is in the object or the state of affairs, independent of us.
Like discovering a scientific law.
Kind of, yeah. It's there whether we recognize it or not. Then you have the value subjectivists, like Ralph Barton Perry. They argue the opposite. Things have value because we desire them or appreciate them or have some kind of interest in them.
So we project the value onto them.
Exactly. The value originates in our subjective experience, our attitudes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, religious systems are fascinating here because if you look at them purely sociologically, you might say, okay, the values they promote seem to be generated by the community, maybe to solve problems of cooperation or give life meaning. So subjectively generated.
Okay, that makes sense from a social science view.
And this is absolutely key to the power of these systems and the model's insight, they gain their immense binding force by presenting these values as if they were objectively real and universally true.
Oh, okay. How do they do that?
Typically by attributing the value system to a transcendent source. God, the Tao, cosmic law, revealed truth, whatever it might be. Something beyond mere human agreement.
Like the Ten Commandments example you gave earlier, not presented as a good idea, but as from God.
Exactly. They're framed as objective moral law, not a negotiated social contract.
Okay, that's a really powerful insight, this idea of presenting values as objective, as a kind of social technology. So, for society to function, does it actually matter if they are truly objective in a philosophical sense? Or is the belief in their objectivity the crucial part?
Well, from a sociological standpoint, especially if you're channeling someone like Durkheim, it's precisely the collective belief in the shared experience of these values as being sacred and non-negotiable that gives them their power.
So the belief does the heavy lifting socially.
Yes, The deep philosophical question of whether values really exist out there is fascinating, but for social cohesion, for the system to work, the perception of objectivity is paramount. It allows the group to reach a consensus that goes beyond just individual whims or preferences.
Right, it binds people together under something seemingly bigger than themselves.
Exactly. So, positing this objective, often transcendent source of value, isn't a bug, it's a feature. It's the core social technology that generates authority, makes the value system feel absolute, non-negotiable. And that is how the system produces binding judgment criteria for right and wrong that feel solid, not just like shifting opinions.
Without that perceived objectivity, it would just be suggestions.
Pretty much, the whole system's authority would likely crumble.
Okay, stepping back then. If we study value, whether we think it's objective or subjective, ultimately doesn't matter for this next point. It naturally leads us to having criteria for evaluation, right? It becomes prescriptive. It tells us how we should act.
Absolutely. Axiology isn't just descriptive. It's the foundation for normative ethics, the part of philosophy that deals with how people ought to behave.
Okay.
So when a system, religious or otherwise, carefully defines its intrinsic values and the instrumental values that serve them, it automatically, inherently, produces a system of judgment.
Judgment. Okay, that sounds a bit negative, like judging people.
It can include that, sure, like moral condemnation, but it's much broader. Think of judgment here as the fundamental organizing principle for evaluating everything: actions, beliefs, goals, even people against that established hierarchy of what the system deems good, important, and worthwhile.
So it's like a measuring stick.
Exactly. It's the shared measuring stick. And this is precisely the judgment phase the River of Reality model highlights. It's where the abstract study of value turns into concrete social distinctions and guidelines for behavior.
Got it.
It creates the shared metric for praise and blame, for what should be pursued and what should be avoided. It shapes the entire fabric of social life, directing the flow of how people interact and what they strive for.
Okay, so we've journeyed from studying values to making judgments based on them. But how do these abstract judgments actually translate into social order? How do they create that flow of hierarchy and, crucially, build social trust? How do they become a real, tangible force? You mentioned Durkheim earlier.
Yes, Emil Durkheim's work is absolutely central here. He provides the sociological engine, if you like, showing how these abstract value judgments become concrete social realities that bind people together.
So what's his core idea?
At the very heart of Durkheim's theory of religion, and society really, is this fundamental division that he believed all societies make. They divide the entire world, conceptually, into two distinct, mutually exclusive domains: the sacred and the profane.
Sacred and profane. Okay, I've heard those terms. What do they mean in his context?
So the sacred encompasses everything could be objects, people, places, ideas, even specific times that are set apart and forbidden. They're treated with a special kind of awe, reverence, maybe even fear.
Set apart.
Yeah, and crucially, Durkheim stressed that nothing is inherently sacred. A rock, a tree, a day of the week. It only becomes sacred when the community collectively invests it with that special status.
Ah, so it's a social creation.
Absolutely. These sacred things become symbols of the group's highest ideals and values. Durkheim called them collective representations. Think of a national flag, a holy text, a sacred site, or even an abstract principle like liberty or justice when it's elevated to that level.
Okay, and the profane.
The profane is everything else. It's the mundane, the ordinary, the everyday, the utilitarian aspects of life. Your job, getting groceries, traffic, the stuff that isn't set apart.
So total opposites.
Complete opposites, and they must be kept separate. Societies develop complex rules, taboos, and rituals precisely to manage the boundary between the sacred and the profane, to protect the sacred from being contaminated by the ordinary.
Right.
Now, this act of collectively deciding, collectively judging something to be sacred, this is the ultimate judgment that the model talks about. When a community says, this book is holy, or this day is special, or this principle is inviolable, they're performing the foundational act of creating their value hierarchy.
It's like drawing the most important line in the sand.
Exactly. It's not just a classification. It's a profound moral and social judgment that structures their entire reality. All other moral rules, right, wrong, pure, impure, good, bad, ultimately flow from this primary division. And for anyone listening who's involved in, say, building online communities or even company culture, Recognizing what the group holds sacred, what
Yeah.
its non-negotiable values or symbols are, is absolutely vital. That defines the core identity and the boundaries.
That's fascinating. So this division isn't just a thought experiment, it's a fundamental social act. But okay, how does this division, this judgment, become a dynamic force?
Right.
How does it create that flow of hierarchy instead of just being a static classification system? Like, how does it get the energy to move things?
Right, great question. Because Durkheim himself argued that beliefs alone are pretty weak. Collective ideas are impotent unless they are brought to life, unless they are enacted through collective action. And that action is ritual.
Ritual, okay, like ceremonies.
Ceremonies? Yes, but it's broader than that. Rituals are basically prescribed, rule-governed behaviors that mediate the relationship between the community and the sacred things they've defined. They are the tangible, observable actions that make the abstract value system feel real and immediate to everyone involved.
So the rituals are where the hierarchy comes alive.
Precisely. You could say rituals are the embodiment, the living enactment of the flow of hierarchy. They are structured, repeatable, collective performances.
And what do they do, functionally?
Several crucial things, according to Durkheim. First, they constantly reinforce that boundary between the sacred and the profane. They make it real, physically and psychologically.
Okay.
Second, by participating together, rituals remind individuals of their place within the larger group, their shared identity, their dependence on the collective.
Build solidarity.
Exactly. And third, this is a famous Durkheim concept, they generate collective effervescence.
Collective effervescence. Sounds bubbly.
I chuckle slightly. It kind of is. It's that heightened state of emotional energy, unity, and excitement that people feel when they come together in a shared ritual, focusing on something sacred. Think about the energy at a really intense concert or a major sporting event final or a powerful religious service.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
That's collective effervescence. And Durkheim argued that this shared emotional energy is what strengthens the collective conscience.
Which is?
The collective conscience is the sum total of shared beliefs, norms, moral attitudes, or values that operate as the unifying force within a society. Rituals recharge it, keep it strong.
Wow. So the ritual isn't just about the belief, it's about generating the feeling of belonging.
Yes, and Durkheim had this really radical insight. He argued that when people participate in these rituals, worshiping their totems or gods, they are, in a very real sense, worshiping society itself. The god or the sacred object is just a symbol of the group.
Whoa, that's a big claim.
It is. But his point was that through these collective actions, the group continuously reaffirms its own values, its own structure, its own reality. It regenerates social solidarity.
So for people building systems, maybe managing teams or communities,
Yeah.
this implies that shared practices, even simple routines like, I don't know, a daily stand-up meeting or a weekly team lunch, can function as rituals that reinforce the group's identity and trust.
Absolutely. It's not just about the content, it's about the shared structured action itself. It regenerates the we. So the flow of hierarchy isn't static, it's this dynamic, ongoing stream of ritualized behavior that keeps the social bonds strong.
Okay, that's a really practical takeaway. So if these rituals bind us, creating this collective conscience and shared energy, let's connect it back to trust. How does this flow of hierarchy, kept alive by ritual, actually build the trust needed for large-scale cooperation? Trust among people who aren't family, who might even be strangers.
Well, Durkheim's definition of religion itself points the way. He defined it as a unified system of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, which unite into one single moral community called a church, all those who adhere to them.
Okay, moral community. That sounds key.
It is key,
Yep.
because that shared understanding of what's sacred and what's profane, reinforced by shared rituals, creates a powerful moral boundary. People who recognize the same sacred things, who follow the same core rules, who feel bound by that same collective conscience, they form a distinct in-group, a moral community.
Right. Us versus them in a sense, but defined by values.
Defined by shared sacred values, yes. And within that moral community, a much higher degree of trust and cooperation becomes possible, even between people who don't know each other personally.
Why? What's the mechanism?
Because their shared adherence to the same value hierarchy, their mutual respect for the same sacred things, and avoidance of the same profane things provides a common ground. It creates predictable behavior and shared expectations.
Ah, so you can assume certain things about how they'll act.
Exactly. You have a baseline assumption that someone who shares your deepest values is likely to follow similar rules of honesty, fairness, reciprocity, whatever the core values are. This dramatically reduces the perceived risk of interacting with them, even if they're a stranger.
It lowers the weirdness factor, maybe?
Shuckles. You could put it that way. It lowers the uncertainty.
Yeah.
And this is the mechanism the model points to for generating large-scale social trust, the kind that extends way beyond your immediate family or clan. It bridges individuals through shared adherence to the hierarchy, creating the wider social web needed for complex societies. It allows that intricate dance of social and economic life to happen among people who aren't related, all flowing from that shared internalized structure of values.
Okay, building trust within a specific moral community, like a tribe or a religious group, based on shared sacred values and rituals that make sense through Durkheim. But the River of Reality model suggests this flow can enable trust on a much, much bigger scale.
Right, among incredibly diverse groups, potentially across all of humanity.
Yeah, like a vast ocean of cooperation, not just a local river. So how do we get there? How do we scale up from the tribe to the global village?
That is the crucial question of scaling, and the model tackles it directly. Our sources suggest starting with a biological baseline, looking at the work of philosopher Peter Singer.
Okay, Peter Singer, what's his angle?
In his book, The Expanding Circle, Singer argues that altruism, caring for others, likely started very small, probably as a genetically influenced drive.
Like protecting your own kids, your family?
Exactly. Kin selection. Helping those who share your genes makes evolutionary sense. So early altruism was likely focused on kin and maybe the immediate band or tribe. This is the smallest, most basic circle of moral concern.
Makes sense, survival-wise.
Absolutely. And this initial state corresponds perfectly to that localized flow of hierarchy we were talking about. Strong trust, strong moral obligation within the in-group.
But not so much for outsiders.
Right. Weak or even hostile attitudes towards outsiders. It's efficient for small group survival, but it's fundamentally tribal, limited.
Okay, so evolution gives us this narrow built-in circle. How do we break out? If it starts so focused on us, how do we ever expand our concern to them, let alone everyone? Singer has an answer for this.
He does. He argues that the primary engine for expanding that circle beyond its biological roots is our capacity for reason.
Reason. Interesting. How does that work? Isn't reason sometimes seen as cold, opposing emotion or empathy?
That's a common view, but Singer sees it differently. He argues reason doesn't replace our innate altruistic feelings. It builds upon them and pushes them towards logical consistency and impartiality.
Okay, how?
Well, once we start reasoning about morality, asking why we should care about someone, reason compels us to generalize or universalize our principles.
Can you give an example?
Sure. If I argue that the suffering of people in my tribe matters, reason pushes me to ask, why does it matter? Is it just because they're my tribe?
Right, that doesn't sound like a very good reason on its own.
Exactly. From an impartial perspective, it's arbitrary. Someone from another tribe could say the same thing about their group with equal justification. Reason exposes the arbitrariness of limiting moral concern based on factors like kinship or race or nationality or where someone happens to live.
So reason forces us to see that if suffering is bad for us, it's probably bad for them too, just because they are also beings who can suffer.
Precisely. It pushes towards recognizing shared characteristics like sentience or rationality or the capacity for well-being as the morally relevant criteria rather than group membership. This rational process, Singer argues, is the key mechanism that allows the flow of hierarchy, the scope of our moral concern, to scale up. It breaks down those tribal walls and expands the circle, potentially to include all of humanity.
Turning the local stream into a much wider river.
Exactly.
That idea that reason pushes us to expand our moral view feels really fundamental. Has anyone else talked about this? You mentioned the Stoics earlier. Did they have something similar?
They absolutely did. It's uncanny, actually. Ancient Stoicism, starting way back in the 3rd century BCE, provides this incredible classical precedent. The Stoics were really pioneers in arguing for a universal moral community.
How so? Weren't the ancient Greeks pretty focused on, Greeks versus barbarians?
They often were, but the Stoics actively rejected that distinction. They saw it as arbitrary, unnatural even. Instead, they famously declared themselves cosmopolitans.
Citizens of the cosmos.
Citizens of the cosmos, exactly. Citizens of the world.
Wow. And what was their justification for that way back then?
It was grounded in their core concept of the logos.
Logos. Like logic or reason?
Yes, but more than that. For the Stoics, logos was this universal reason, a kind of divine principle or natural law that pervades the entire universe and, crucially, is present within every single human being.
So everyone shares in this universal reason.
Yes. And because all humans share this rational faculty, the Stoics argued, we are all members of a single global community, the cosmopolis. Our shared reason, not our family ties or city-state origin, is the true basis for moral concern and mutual obligation.
That's remarkably modern sounding.
It really is. And they even had a practical concept for how this expansion of concern happens, called oikaisis.
Oikaisis. Bit of a mouthful.
Chuckles. It is. It roughly translates to appropriation or affiliation or belonging. It describes this natural psychological process where our circle of concern expands outwards. It starts with innate self-love.
Okay.
Then it naturally extends to our immediate family, then to friends, fellow citizens. And then, guided by reason, recognizing our shared logos, it should extend to encompass all of humanity.
Concentric circles. Just
No.
like Singer's expanding circle.
Exactly. It's almost a perfect parallel, millennia apart.
Mm.
It shows this idea of a rationally driven expansion of moral concern isn't just a modern invention. It's a deep, recurring theme in human ethical thought, a powerful potential current within the river of reality.
Okay, stepping back again, this is building a really coherent picture. You start with a local value system, maybe Durkheimian, creating that initial in-group trust.
Right, the local hierarchy.
But then reason comes in, like Singer and the Stoics described, and it allows us to abstract the core principles from that local system, things like justice, fairness, dignity, reciprocity,
Mm-hmm.
and universalize them, apply them more broadly.
Precisely. The local code provides the initial framework, the sacred structure, the flow for the tribe. But reason acts like a filter or a distiller. It identifies the underlying, perhaps universal principles within that local code.
And sees they could apply to everyone.
Yes. It allows for the creation of a higher-order ethical framework, one that can potentially bridge different, previously separate moral communities. It forms the basis for trust and cooperation on a much larger, even global scale, by finding common ground in these abstracted principles.
So the river broadens significantly here.
It really does. It becomes capable of carrying a much larger volume of interaction and potential trust.
Okay, so we're scaling up. We're moving from tribal trust to potentially global trust, driven by reason abstracting universal principles. But what are the actual rules? What's the operational code, the architecture of trust, as you called it, that makes interaction between strangers on this scale actually possible and reliable? What are the navigation rules for this wider river?
That's the practical question, isn't it? For this scaled-up flow of hierarchy to actually work, to generate reliable trust among people who don't know each other and might belong to different local moral communities, it needs some clear, widely understood guiding principles.
Like a common language for morality.
Sort of, yeah, an operational code.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look across global ethical traditions, our sources highlight two principles that stand out as foundational pillars of this architecture.
Okay, what are they?
The first is probably the most famous and widespread, the Golden Rule.
Ah, yes. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Pretty familiar.
Extremely familiar, and that's part of its power. Its near ubiquity is stunning. You find versions of it everywhere: ancient Egypt, Zoroastrianism, Confucianism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, various philosophical schools.
Wow, really everywhere. What does that tell us?
It strongly suggests that this principle captures something absolutely fundamental about how to maintain stable, cooperative social life. It seems to be a kind of naturally emergent solution to the problem of interacting with others.
And why is it so effective? What's its strength?
Its simplicity, mainly,
Yeah.
and its direct appeal to empathy and the basic logic of reciprocity. You don't need a PhD in ethics to understand it.
Right.
Just imagine yourself on the receiving end of your potential action. How would you feel? It uses our own self-interest and feelings as a guide for how to treat others.
Are there different versions? I feel like I've heard slightly different phrasings.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
There's the positive or directive form, like the Christian version you quoted.
Okay.
Treat others as you would like to be treated. There's the negative or prohibitive form, often seen as maybe even more fundamental by some, found in Judaism, for example. Do not treat others in ways you would not like to be treated. Don't do harm you wouldn't want done to you.
The don't do version.
Right. And you could even identify an empathetic or responsive form, sort of like recognize in others the same desires and feelings you have. Whatever the form, the core function is the same.
Which is?
To provide a basic, understandable code of conduct for interaction. It fosters trust both within a community and, crucially, between different communities by establishing a baseline of predictable, non-harmful, and ideally considerate behavior. It makes social interactions less risky, more cooperative. It's arguably the most successful, widely adopted technology for generating interpersonal trust ever devised. A simple but incredibly powerful current keeping the social river flowing.
The golden rule is definitely powerful and intuitive. But, it does rely a lot on individual feelings and empathy, right? And maybe it's not always perfectly consistent. I think you mentioned Kant earlier. Was he trying to find something more, I don't know, solid?
That's exactly right. While the Golden Rule is effective, some philosophers, particularly Immanuel Kant during the Enlightenment, were looking for a basis for ethics that was even more rigorous, more certain. Something grounded not in potentially shifting feelings or desires, but in pure, universal reason.
Okay, so moving from empathy to logic.
In a way, yes. Kant wanted an absolute, unconditional moral law that would bind all rational beings everywhere, always, just by virtue of them being rational. And he formulated this in his famous categorical imperative.
Categorical imperative. Sounds important. What is it?
It has several formulations, but the most famous one is the formula of universal law. Act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will toll that it should become a universal law.
Whoa, okay, break that down. Maxim, universal law.
Okay, a maxim is just your personal rule or principle for acting in a certain situation. Like, when I need money, I'll make a promise I don't intend to keep.
Okay, that's the maxim.
Right. The categorical imperative then says, okay, before you act on that maxim, run a test. Could you rationally will that everyone act on that same rule? All the time, everywhere. Could it become a universal law of nature without creating a logical contradiction?
Ah, the universal test. So for the lying promise example.
Kant argues you can't universalize it. Because if everyone made lying promises whenever it suited them, the whole practice of making promises would break down.
Right.
Nobody would trust promises anymore.
Right, the word promise would become meaningless.
Exactly. The maxim, when universalized, destroys the very possibility of acting on it. It's self-defeating, therefore irrational, and therefore immoral, according to Kant.
That's a purely logical argument against it. No feelings involved.
Precisely. The power Kant saw here is that if everyone acted only on maxims that could pass this universalization test, you'd have a basis for trust even between complete strangers. Their behavior would be governed by consistent, predictive principles of reason, not just whims or calculations of advantage.
Okay, that's one formulation. You said there were others?
Yes. Another really crucial one is the formula of humanity. Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, and never merely as a means.
Treat people as ends, never just as means. I've heard that too. What does it mean?
It means recognizing that every rational being, every person, has intrinsic absolute worth, dignity. They are valuable in themselves, not just valuable as tools or instruments for achieving your goals.
So you can't just use people.
You can't just use people. You must respect their autonomy, their rationality, their status as ends in themselves. This formulation provides a really powerful philosophical foundation for ideas like universal human rights, inherent dignity, and the kind of mutual respect that's absolutely essential for any kind of just and trusting society.
It's a different flavor than the Golden Rule, definitely. More about duty and respect for rationality itself.
Exactly. It's a profound shift, anchoring trust not just in reciprocal feelings, but in a shared rational nature and the duties that flow from it.
Okay, so let's put these two side by side then. The Golden Rule and Kant's categorical imperative. Both seem aimed at building universal trust, but they come at it differently. Can we compare them?
Yeah, absolutely. Our sources lay out a helpful comparison. Let's look at a few key aspects.
Okay.
Primary basis. The Golden Rule, as we said, is rooted in reciprocity, empathy, imagining yourself in the other's shoes, relational. Kant's imperative is based on pure practical reason, logic, the search for universal consistency, rule-based.
Got it. Empathy versus logic.
Kind of. Core question. The Golden Rule asks, how would I want to be treated? It's personal imaginative. Kant asks, can I rationally will my personal rule to become a universal law without contradiction? It's impersonal, logical
Right.
motivation. For the Golden Rule, it's often driven by fellow feeling, maybe wanting a good outcome for yourself in return, avoiding negative consequences. For Kant, the only truly moral motivation is duty acting out of respect for the moral law itself, regardless of consequences or personal desires.
Duty for duty's sake.
Pretty much. Nature of obligation. Kant saw the Golden Rule as hypothetical. Its command depends on what you happen to desire. Remember the masochist example. If you want people to harm you, the Golden Rule might seem to permit harming others.
Ah, right. That's a weakness.
Kant thought so. His imperative, though, is categorical. It's
Yeah.
absolute, unconditional, binding on everyone just because they're rational no matter what they want.
Okay, strengths and weaknesses.
Strength. Golden rule, super intuitive, emotionally resonant, found everywhere, easy to teach. Count rigorous, aims for objectivity and consistency, provides a strong foundation for rights.
And weaknesses.
Weakness. Golden rule can be subjective. Masochist problem. Relies on variable empathy. Kant can seem rigid, abstract, maybe lacking compassion or context sensitivity sometimes. Applying it in complex situations with conflicting duties can be tricky.
So neither is perfect, maybe, but together they represent pretty sophisticated ways humans have developed to structure trust on a large scale.
Exactly. They're like advanced navigation systems that emerge from that flow of hierarchy to make interaction possible and predictable across vast distances and diverse groups, moving us beyond just tribal loyalty. They are key parts of the architecture for universal trust.
Okay, this brings us to what feels like a really crucial connection in the river of reality model, connecting this whole flow of hierarchy, the values, judgments, rituals, trust principles, to the emergence of complex economics, commerce, trade.
Right, the payoff.
Yeah. The sources are basically saying that this widespread social trust built by the moral hierarchy isn't just nice to have. It's the essential precondition for a functioning economy, especially a complex, modern one. How does that work? How does morality become economic infrastructure?
It's a fascinating link, bridging level 3, hierarchy, and level 4, commerce. The first step is understanding how the social values system gets inside individual heads. And for that, we can look at Adam Smith, yes, the Wealth of Nations guy, but his earlier book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments.
Oh, he wrote about morality too. I didn't know that.
Absolutely. And it's arguably just as important. Way back in 1759, he laid out this brilliant psychological mechanism for how we develop moral judgment. He argued it doesn't come from some special moral sense, but from our natural sociability and our capacity for sympathy.
Sympathy, like feeling sorry for someone.
Broader than that for Smith. It was about imaginatively placing ourselves in another person's situation, trying to experience what they're experiencing, having a fellow feeling with any passion whatsoever, our ability to connect emotionally.
Okay, so empathy, basically.
Pretty much. But here's the clever part. Smith said this sympathy is regulated by something he called the impartial spectator.
The impartial spectator, what's that?
It's like an internalized observer, a voice inside your head representing the judgment of society, or maybe what a well-informed, unbiased person would think. The man within the breast, he called it.
Ah, like your conscience judging your actions from an outside view.
Exactly. We learn to view our own behavior not just selfishly, but through the eyes of this impartial spectator. And we naturally want its approval and want to avoid its disapproval or censure.
So we adjust our behavior to match what society expects.
Yes. And in the context of our model, you can think of Smith's impartial spectator as the psychological endpoint of Durkheim's collective conscience. It's how the flow of hierarchy, the group's values, becomes your internal guide.
How the social gets internalized.
Precisely. And Smith argued this process cultivates essential social virtues. Prudence, looking after yourself, justice, not hurting others, beneficence, actively helping others, and critically, self-command, controlling your impulses and passions.
Self-command, that sounds important for trust.
Hugely. Someone guided by the impartial spectator, someone with self-command, becomes a reliable, trustworthy agent. They self-regulate according to shared norms, even when nobody's looking. For any organization listening, fostering this kind of internalized ethics is way more effective than just relying on rules and surveillance. It builds genuinely trustworthy people.
Okay, so Smith explains how individuals internalize the hierarchy, becoming trustworthy actors. But for huge economic systems, global markets, complex finance, surely we need more than just individuals having a conscience. How do these values get built into the system itself at a societal level?
Excellent point. Smith gives us the micro foundation. For the macro picture, we turn to the Nobel laureate Douglass North and his work on economic history and institutions.
Okay, Douglass North, what did he argue?
North's core argument, which won him the Nobel, is that institutions are the primary driver of long-term economic success or failure for societies.
Institutions,
Right.
like banks,
Yeah.
governments.
Those can be institutions, yes, but North used the term much more broadly. He defined institutions as the humanly devised constraints that structure human interaction. Basically, the rules of the game in a society.
The rules of the game, okay.
And crucially, North divided these rules into two types. First, there are formal rules. These are the explicit, written-down constraints. laws, constitutions, property rights, legal contracts,
Yeah.
the stuff we usually think of as rules.
Right.
But then equally or even more important are the informal constraints. These are the implicit unwritten rules.
Hmm.
Social sanctions, taboos, customs, traditions, norms, and especially relevant for us, codes of conduct.
The unspoken rules.
Exactly. The stuff everyone just knows you're supposed to do or not do. And here's the critical link, the bridge from level 3 to level 4. North argued that the flow of hierarchy, the shared values, moral principles, and codes of conduct generated by a society's ethical or religious system is the primary source of these vital informal constraints.
Ah, so the moral hierarchy becomes the informal rules of the economic game.
Precisely. Those shared values about honesty, fairness, keeping promises, respecting property, they are the substance of the informal institutions that underpin economic life. For anyone in business, this is huge. Formal contracts are essential, but they only work effectively if they rest on a foundation of these shared informal norms of trustworthy behavior. If you can't basically trust the other party to act in good faith, no amount of legal text can fully protect you.
Okay, I think I'm seeing the connection. So, practically speaking, what does a society get economically from having a strong flow of hierarchy, these shared informal rules based on morality and trust? What's the actual tangible benefit?
The core benefit, according to North, is a reduction of transaction costs.
Transaction costs, what are those exactly?
They're basically all the costs involved in making an economic exchange happen, beyond the price of the good or service itself. So the costs of finding out information, bargaining and negotiating the deal, writing the contract, monitoring the other party to make sure they fulfill their end, and enforcing the agreement if they don't.
Okay, all the friction in the system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now imagine a low-trust world, one without a strong shared flow of hierarchy. Transaction costs are incredibly high
Why?
because every interaction is risky. You constantly have to worry about being cheated, lied to, having your property stolen, or the other person simply not doing what they promised. You have to spend huge resources on monitoring, security, complex legal safeguards.
Sounds exhausting and expensive.
It is, and it severely limits economic activity.
Yeah.
In such a world, exchange is mostly confined to small, close-knit groups, family, clan where trust is personal, based on direct relationships, or enforced by the immediate threat of retaliation or social ostracism. Complex impersonal trade with strangers, forget it. Too risky, too costly.
Right. Hard to build a global economy that way.
Impossible. But now consider a high-trust society, one with a deeply embedded flow of hierarchy, strong informal institutions based on shared values like honesty, fairness, promise-keeping. What happens to transaction costs?
They must go way down.
Dramatically. When people have internalized Smith's impartial spectator, when they feel bound by shared sacred norms of conduct, you can generally trust them to act in good faith. Contracts become more self-enforcing because people feel an internal obligation to honor them. You don't need to spend nearly as much on monitoring, enforcement, and complex safeguards.
Because people regulate themselves mostly.
Exactly. And that reduction in transaction costs is the magic ingredient. It's what makes complex long-distance trade with strangers feasible. It allows for greater specialization, the growth of markets, investment, innovation, the whole engine of modern economic prosperity, the flow of commerce in level 4.
Wow. So the moral hierarchy isn't just cultural fluff, it's actual vital economic infrastructure.
Absolutely crucial. As important as roads or electricity or the internet, it's the invisible infrastructure of trust that makes the visible economy possible. It really makes you pause and appreciate the sheer amount of trust underpinning, say, clicking buy now online, doesn't it? Relying on countless strangers and systems to uphold their end, all based on these deep shared codes. Hashtag outro.
And that really leads to a final question for you listening. Now that we've traced this flow, as you look around at the incredible complexity of our modern world, what seemingly separate things do you now see connected by this invisible flow of hierarchy? What hidden currents of trust or shared values are now more visible to you?
Yeah, it's a powerful lens to look through.
It really is. Just to quickly recap our journey through this part of the river of reality, we saw how religion and ethics act like applied axiological systems. They systematically study and rank values, defining what a community holds sacred, what's intrinsically good.
Right, the study of value. That study then produces judgment, the criteria for evaluating everything against that value system. This judgment becomes socially real through the Durkheimian division of sacred and profane, creating a distinct moral community bound by shared reverence.
Held together by ritual.
Exactly. The flow of hierarchy is that dynamic process fueled by ritual that maintains the structure and regenerates the group's collective conscience. But for trust to go beyond the tribe, This hierarchy needs to scale.
Which is where reason comes in.
Yes, reason highlighted by Singer and the Stoics allows us to abstract universal principles from local codes, expanding the circle of moral concern. This scaled-up hierarchy then gets its operational rules, its architecture of trust, from principles like the Golden Rule, based on empathy and reciprocity.
And Kant's categorical imperative, based on universal reason and duty.
Right. These provide the reliable codes for interaction among strangers. And finally, this whole moral social structure becomes the bedrock for economics.
Internalized via Smith's impartial spectator.
Creating trustworthy individuals,
Oh.
and then functioning as North's crucial informal institutions.
Which/transaction costs.
Exactly. Enabling the complex markets and cooperation of level 4. So ultimately, the flow of hierarchy is this amazing transformation process.
Yeah.
Abstract value becomes tangible trust. And that trust becomes the very foundation, allowing complex civilization, commerce, governance, science, art to emerge and flourish. It's where shared identity solidifies into stable social order, guiding the whole river of human activity.
So what's the big takeaway for us? I mean, this deep dive really shows that behind every contract, every online purchase, every team project, there's this incredible, often hidden structure of shared values and trust holding it all up. That's a powerful thought, especially for those of us, building things, designing systems, leading teams that depend on people working together reliably.
It underscores the importance of culture and ethics.
Definitely. So here's a thought to leave you with. The next time you interact with a stranger in a professional setting, maybe even just order a coffee or rely on a service online, pause for a second. What are those unspoken, maybe centuries-old codes of conduct? What's the inherited flow of hierarchy, that silent river of trust that you're implicitly banking on for that simple interaction to actually work smoothly?
It's usually quite a lot when you stop to think about it.
It really is. And maybe the more provocative part, what would happen if those informal institutions, those shared agreements about basic decency and honesty, started to seriously erode? What would be the immediate, tangible impact on the very systems, technological, economic, social, that we design, build, and rely on every single day?
It's a sobering question about the foundations we often take for granted.
It is indeed. Keep diving deep. Keep looking for those hidden connections that shape our world. You never know when you'll hit that aha moment that shifts your whole perspective. Until next time on The Deep Dive, stay curious.